Coin traders, how are we doing? Thanks for joining me for the show. Finally, sorry it has been a while, still dealing with a lot of personal things. And also big new announcement, I am partnered with the BTCC exchange. Did take a long time to finally jump into a partnership with an exchange. Was being very selective and do think that the BTCC exchange is a very good representation and a very good partnership here. So if you do want to trade with me over on BTCC, then definitely check out the link down in the description or the top comment here down below. Do offer no KYC and no VPN for US customers, so it's definitely a great opportunity and a great exchange, as well as also doing up to 100 plus X leverage on multiple coin pairings here. But yeah, anyway, thanks for all the patience and cooperation while we have been getting the show back together here. Hopefully you have been following me here over on Twitter at Quinn_trades is the handle over there. Do post very frequently, so hopefully you can stay updated over there, but we'll be back to regular scheduled videos here over on the channel. But so the other day did actually make a post talking about how Algorand was ready to make a move. Now, one of the things is we actually didn't know that President Trump was going to be announcing this big announcement talking about a strategic reserve here for crypto and a lot of great things, specifically mentioning XRP Solana and ADA Cardano. So very, very good sign. And that's kind of why we had a lot of big pumping. And one of the things about that I also made a tweet about is that when we do have news-driven pumps like what we actually experience, you do have to be careful because typically what happens is that especially when the sentiment is low, you get a lot of false-driven hype and euphoria from one optimistic outlook in one post, but that's not enough to sustain and actually change the trend in a lot of instances. So that's why it really comes down to the follow-on days after a big announcement like that is made. And so now, obviously, this does apply to Algorand here, but so specifically, we do need to look at what's going to happen here in the coming days. And we know that because we were actually expecting a little bit more of this nice upside move, the catalyst here for the news was definitely very nice, but also had very nice upside days as well, specifically looking at a very nice tight formation, where we're going to be looking at getting stuck up at a lot of resistance. So definitely a lot to dive into here with the Algorand chart, both in terms of what we were looking at here prior to the big news announcement, as well as what we're actually looking at now and what we can expect after a big catalyst and news-driven event, and kind of what the scenario and setup could potentially be like from here, and what signs to actually be aware of. So I guess the first thing that I do want to look at is actually what the current setup looks like now after we do have this type of announcement and a move. So we had a very, very big bullish day here, and we actually saw Algorand close up over 15%. At the high point, we were looking up over 20%. Obviously did have a little bit more of that selling off towards the top, and that's what did create this wick. And we did have a very substantial close here below the 50-period EMA. But what is very significant here about the candle that just closed on the daily is that we actually had a very nice break above not only the 12, but also the 26-period here on this chart. So if we actually zoom out here, we can see that ever since we actually saw our bearish cross here and the price actually rejected from these 12 and 26 as that resistive point, we only saw bounces come up to test the 12 here on 2 attempts. So when we actually had 2 big follow-on candles here with a little bit of that nice increasing bullish volume here, very good sign to actually run up and break the 12 and 26 period EMAs. So despite the fact that we're getting rejected from the 50, that's kind of a level that we could expect, especially after breaking through and having that close on top of these big key resistance exponential moving averages. So now typically when we do see this type of setup and scenario here, especially after breaking through several big resistance points, right now, even if we do reject and don't see the current daily candle blast through this with a very nice follow through and bullish volume momentum here, what we're actually looking for is establishing this resistance point, pulling back and actually confirming both the 12 and 26 as being that very nice supportive point, especially after confirming it as this big resistive point here on the way down. So after a rejection from a resistance, that's always what we want to see. And that's typically what we do end up seeing in a very strong, nice move where the trend does change, is that we do get a rejection from a resistance point, pulling back and then testing the previous resistance now as confirming and back testing that level of support. So if we do get that level of back test and support and allow the 12 and 26 to actually form that bullish cross, that's going to be another big, extremely bullish sign that's going to continue a lot of upside pattern if we do get a lot more of that follow through. Now, if we want to go ahead and look at the volume that just closed here on the most recent daily candle, this is the most amount of bullish volume. In fact, the most amount of volume that we have seen here, period, in about a month since we actually had this big sell-off and this big rejection and hammer candle that ultimately ended up putting in more or less one of the low points for this overall move. So when we do look at volume here, we can see that more or less the peak amount of selling pressure did start to get overall exhausted, and that's kind of why we were able to put in our low. And so that's one of the signs that we were actually looking at when I made the Twitter post earlier about how we were going to be expecting a pretty big move here out of Algorand, even before seeing a potential news announcement out of President Donald Trump. So what we're actually looking for after establishing the low here, we did run up, set a higher low, and the thing is about these candles, we didn't necessarily see inside bars, or they were kind of close to it in the form of a sort of rising wedge here, but very small bodies. Now, ultimately, this kind of would look like a little bit more of a bearish pattern, especially with tapering off bullish volume. But the fact that we actually did pull back and see a huge rally, followed by another upside bullish candle here with a very nice body, was more or less on that confirmation side of exactly what we wanted to see when we do talk about being poised for a very nice upside move. So now next thing I actually want to look at here on this daily chart for Algorand is pulling up the RSI Relative Strength Index. If we actually look at where this did bottom out, we were looking in at a low of 29.61. So we actually did break bearish below this line. And so typically when we do have a very nice big bullish pump to the upside, and we do see a little bit more of a retracement and a pullback, we always look for the first oversold condition to be a very nice point that we do typically find as a very nice bounce attempt zone. So we were finding that at about 22.54. Looking left, we see that as a very big point of resistance here before pulling back to test the 12 on the way up to the trend high most recently, where we were looking at prices come in at 61.33. But if we also look at the RSI Relative Strength Index and actually look at the last time that it was below the 30 line in that overextended to the downside level, we were looking at that being August in 2024, where we were actually looking at putting in some of the lows that we were seeing for Algorand, where we were looking at lows down to 9.43 cents. So now I do want to flip over here into the weekly chart, and you can see that especially once we have several big, nice bullish weeks, we were just getting so far on top of these exponential moving averages for the weekly. Now, the good thing is that we have actually flipped bullish, saw this very nice upside movement with huge increase in bullish volume, but ultimately we did know that overextension does mean a backtest and a retracement, especially when we did have resistance points be so massive, kind of right around the 27 to 28 cent mark. So unfortunately, on this pullback, we actually didn't see the close hold on top of where the close for the resistance was on the weekly, which would have been right around 27.5 cents. So we did drop down to about 25.96, so around the 26 cent level. So slightly below that. But the thing on this chart is that if we actually look at where we were seeing closing level of resistance right at the 26. So on the weekly candle here that just closed, we were looking at a very nice bullish upside here with this big long lower shadow. So an extremely big and bullish candle here. So despite getting stuck up at this 12 period EMA on this weekly, like we mentioned, that does get stuck up at the 50 period on the daily. So that's a pretty big resistance point as well. Knowing that, especially looking left, big area of opportunity for resistance and sell-off pressure. So very normal here, but we do want to make sure that we maintain 26 period EMA here weekly support, which right now on the current week would be about 30.18 cents. Or actually, excuse me, that would be at about 27.72. 30.18 would be the upside resistance point right now for the 12 period EMA. Now, if we go ahead and look at volume as well, especially after huge bullish volume, sell-off pressure wasn't necessarily that sustainable, especially after the most recent bearish candle here. Small body, not a lot of price sell-off in terms of the range for that week. And then right now we did look at the close of another nice bullish week. So hopefully the current weekly can actually either see little selling pressure for the bulls, assuming the bears and the bulls will see a very nice upside week after that. Or what we do want to see is another continued following on. realistically, right now, what does seem kind of like the most probable, especially after hopefully trying to change the trend from a news announcement from President Trump, is likely going to be a little period of consolidation where we're actually going to start to see a trend change here. And I'm not necessarily expecting an immediate V-shaped recovery. Obviously, we could expect that if we do see a little bit more bullish news, because that would start to sort of change the sentiment and start to actually propel a lot more retail money to come back buying into the space. But so flipping into the 2-day, kind of another reason we think a little bit more of the consolidation is likely is just because there are so many overhead resistance points that we are going to need to see a little bit of time here, especially like we talked about changing the sentiment. So realistically, I think the bottom is probably mostly in at this point, especially after seeing a lot of dip buying here at that point, anywhere below the 23-cent mark. So on this 2-day as well, 2-day week over week candles increasing bullish volume. So very nice running up to this resistance point. Now, right now, just need a little bit of time to cool down, have that news set in for people, have a little bit more of that sell off from that news event. And that's kind of where we do end up leading into this typically consolidation range before seeing the next leg of upside if we do in fact see a resistance point break. Looking a little bit more short term here down to the 12-hour here before we wrap up, and kind of like we talked about here, big nice bullish candle breaking through a lot of big resistance points. Now just going to be a time to actually backtest and confirm some previous resistances. So on this 12-hour, you can see that we were looking at big resistance zone in between the 12 and 26 here on this 12-hour chart. So very nice big break here. Would look to see a backtest and a retracement very close to a bullish cross here where the 12 does cross the 26. So that is going to be our downside target. So even if we do see a little bit of a sell-off, could be looking at around the 26-cent range for a downside target to find support. So from current price points, that would end up being right around an 8.5. Probably we'll just call it around an 8% sell-off at a low that we could expect to still see a very nice strong backtest of that resistance, previous resistance anyway, zone to hopefully confirm it and prove it as support. But yeah, so I think a lot of the crypto and altcoin space in general has been massively overextended to the downside. Huge sell-offs here in the last couple of months. So definitely shaking out a lot of that bullish sentiment, and it is pretty fearful right now and a lot of negative sentiment. So we are at that point right now where we do need to see what it does take to ultimately start to ease people's fears and start to incentivize people to come back into the market here. Now, the timeline is definitely different for this crypto cycle, but we were kind of expecting that just because everyone else has been expecting a pretty much stereotypical 4-year cycle on the dot based off patterns and things from historical cycles. But yeah, when everyone's expecting it, we know that that's pretty much not when it is likely to come in. So the unexpected always does happen, but we know that markets always do what they're supposed to, just never when they are supposed to. So right now, we're just seeing the never when, but ultimately we do know that the markets always will. And we are still going to be approaching a very nice alt season because there's nothing to indicate that anything about sentiment or the crypto boom is going to be any different this time. Obviously not financial advice though, and always do appreciate everyone watching and would love to hear everyone's thoughts, comments, questions, issues, disagreements, all that stuff down in the comments sections below. And so yeah, that is going to go ahead and wrap up the show for today on Algorand ALGO on that ticker. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please hit that thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you have not done so just yet. Do appreciate all the continuous love and support. As always, it does mean so much. Don't forget to come trade with me here over on BTCC Exchange, and I will look forward to catching you back in the next video.